Yeah, to prepare the technical background for the spatial analysis of animal seed dispersal, I will focus here now on the following issues. First, I want to briefly outline why we analyze spatial point patterns. Then I explain how we can measure the characteristic features of point patterns. And for this, I focus especially on measures that depend on spatial scale. And finally, I explain how we can compare observed patterns with patterns of known structure. Yeah, why do we analyze spatial patterns at all? Well, the answer for this is quite simple, because we think that spatial structures and processes are quite important in ecology. And now, why are they important? You may ask this. Yeah, for example, in plant ecology, it is very well known that most species are not randomly distributed and that the spatial configuration of neighbors drives plant interactions. So on the one hand, if you have more neighbors, you may suffer stronger competition. But on the other hand, if you are a small seedling, you may have a larger tree nearby and you may benefit from the shade from this nearby tree. So, for this reason, it is not surprising that many coexistence mechanisms have also very strong spatial component. Yeah, and also theoretical studies show that spatial processes can leave a signature at emerging spatial patterns. And this is very nicely summarized by Stephen Hubble. You may know that Stephen Hubble is the person that had in the early 80s a quite crazy idea to map large or huge plots of tropical forests. So he didn't want to map a plot of only 1 hectare. He wanted to map as much as 50 hectare in such a detail that all trees from the diameter at this side of a pencil were included in his analysis. So at this time in the early 80s, this was extremely shocking for all other ecologists. But at the end, this was one of the most successful data enterprises in ecology, with now more than 60 plots worldwide that using the same census protocol, and hundreds or even thousands of publications came out from the things. Yeah, anyway, Steve Hubble said, whatever coexistence mechanisms were operating in the forest, they should leave a spatial signature that could be detected by making explicit maps of individual tree locations. Yeah, and this in some way summarizes very nicely my research agenda. Yeah, that means there is some hope that we should be able to reveal the underlying processes by using spatial analysis. Clearly, this involves a number of very specific tasks. So for example, we need to describe spatial patterns as close as possible using something called null models I will explain in a minute. And then we can use the information on the observed spatial structures to derive very specific hypotheses on the underlying processes. And this is needed, so for this, the spatial analysis is needed to know exactly what is observed in the field. And once we know this, we can test hypotheses on the underlying processes by using very specific point process models. Yeah, first of all, we need to define what a spatial point pattern is and which different types of point patterns we need to analyze in the data of animal seed dispersal. Yeah, generally, we first define an observation window, and the spatial point pattern then consists of the locations of all ecological objects of interest within the observation window. So here you see the typical point pattern with the observation window and all points inside. Yeah, in this case, a complete mapping is quite important. However, in some situations there are too many points to be mapped. And in such cases, one also can use a random sample of all points. So if you remember, in José's data, we have a random sample of all animal droppings in this study area. Yeah, so now this is the typical example of a point pattern. And often there is some additional information that characterizes the points. And this information is usually called marks. There are different types of marks and different types of marked point patterns. To distinguish them is quite important because they need all different methods to be properly analyzed. Yeah, we may have, for example, two types of points. For example, two different tree species. And this now is one example where the red points may indicate the species 1 and the black points may indicate the species 2. And this is a bivariate pattern. Yeah, but also we may have some type of qualitative information. For example, if a given plant is surviving or dead. Or, as in the case of José's data, if a dropping contains seeds or not. Or we may have some quantitative information, for example the size of the plant or the number of flowers. In case of José's data, the qualitative marks are the number of seeds of two different plant species. Yeah, here we may make a short break before I will explain in the next video how to quantify spatial structure by using summary functions.